Greetings, my friends. This is Archanis, and today we are going to talk about the different kinds of tables that you can play at for your tabletop role-playing games. Now, of course, not all of these tables are actual physical tables, and that is part of what we are going to discuss. There are three major ways that you can play your tabletop role-playing game with your players, and that is using a virtual table, a physical table, or a imaginary table. A number of games that you might use can also use a combination of the three, and we will get into each one of those and how certain systems might be more conducive for some of those than others. So first and foremost, a physical table is, well, just that. It is a table that also utilizes a lot more of physical elements for your game. This can be things like tokens or minifigures that represent your players' characters or the monsters or entities that they are coming across. It also can mean having a physical map in front of you that the players move around on a physical board. There's also elements that are used in a lot of systems, such as having physically interactable elements such as dice, character sheets, cards, things of that nature. The primary function of more physical games is that they allow players to both have a better concept of where their characters are in space, and this can be very useful for a number of systems like D&D that makes very specific use of, okay, you have X amount of spaces that you can move per turn, or your attacks or spells or whatever have X range. So if a creature is 30 feet away, you know when playing D&D that means, okay, it will take 6 spaces on a board for me to get to that other target, or that my ranged attack or my spell needs to have a minimum distance of 30 feet. This is different from some other systems that might not make that kind of use of a physical board, such as Mutants and Masterminds, which implements much more of a theater of the mind approach, which I will get into in a little bit. But basically, they don't use a real board. Instead, this system makes use of having a concept of relative distance to things, or relative speed or interactability, such as, oh, this target is far away from you, so if you try and shoot at them, it's going to be a lot harder for you to hit them, as opposed to what I said before with D&D, which is like, okay, maybe this target is 60 feet away and your weapon is only 30 feet of range. So you either can't target them or you will be targeting them severely disadvantaged. The other benefit of a physical board is it allows for more tactile interaction. There is a number of players who might benefit much more from having pieces that they can physically move around and interact with in order to be more engaged and invested in the game itself, especially if a player doesn't necessarily have the strongest concept of maybe what certain things look like. Having something like a physical board or physical minifigures can help give them a better idea of what their surroundings are, what other players' characters look like, what the monsters look like, etc. Beyond just that, physical boards can kind of be used in a variety of different ways. You can have ones that are much more detailed, like you can purchase these like beautiful grid maps that have been made by professional designers and really give people a strong level of immersion into the game. It might even provide you as a GM some additional ideas as to what sort of things are in their environments that they can interact with, such as if you have a map in front of you that has like rocks and trees in it, then the players might say things like, oh, I want to climb the tree, or I want to hide behind the rocks, etc. It allows them to use their environment in a different way that you as the GM might not have thought of, because perhaps you just described the field as having like, oh, it's an open grassy field, and it doesn't really give the players as much to work off of or build off. However, the major downside to doing a physical board is that it is much more financially challenging. And both for the GM and potentially also for the players. It costs a lot of money to buy minifigures, especially if you're going to have a game where there is a lot of non-player characters or monsters that they're going to be interacting and fighting with. It costs a lot of money to get a beautiful grid map for the players to move their pieces on. That's not even including buying paints to paint miniatures or anything like that. There is, of course, cheaper ways of doing those things, which is you can just buy a dry erase grid that then serves the function of enabling the players to see where they are in space, but it doesn't provide maybe that same level of visceral detail. Players might also feel like they need to provide their own miniatures, or perhaps you, for financial reasons, cannot provide miniatures for your players and ask them to provide it themselves. There are, of course, then also limitations. Even with how beautiful and detailed a physical board can be, there are inevitably going to be things that you can't prepare for. There's a lot of improvisation that goes into many of these role-playing games. And if the players, for example, can't find a miniature that really represents their character well, or maybe they come across a monster that there just isn't a affordable or any miniature for that exists. Maybe you have like a monster that you created. That kind of thing is probably not going to be easily found. You're going to have to either go for the next best thing, the easiest point of comparison, or spend even more money trying to get like a custom made figure or something like that. So, pros and cons. This then, of course, goes into the virtual tabletop. A virtual tabletop takes a lot of the benefits of a physical tabletop, but makes it a little bit more flexible and more affordable in most cases. This, of course, doesn't necessarily support players who might benefit more from a tactile approach as well. And especially if you as the GM have prepared special materials, like for a number of my games, I have drawn maps of different parts of the world that the players can then look at and reference. If you're in a virtual game, maybe you can take a picture of those maps and put it on the screen, but it will be harder to reference, and or the quality of looking at a digitized version of a map versus a physical one in front of you is going to be significantly impacted most of the time. The benefit is that there are many networks, websites, apps, etc. out there that provide much more affordable ways of playing the game. I myself have used the website Roll20 for many, many years, and it is a free website that you can get on the computer. It has the downside that it doesn't really work for mobile so well, but you can choose to pay a little bit of money into it for some additional perks and additional tokens, or you can just use their free library and also download images from the internet to supplement for things that they don't have on their library or that you would need to pay money for. And this means that instead of having the limited variety of battle maps, tokens, miniatures, etc. that exist in the physical realm, you now have the much larger library of anything that you can find on the internet as a free image available to you. I've also had a number of players who will do something like commission digital artwork for their characters, and then they can put those characters directly into their game, which is, again, going to be much less work and usually less money than getting something like a miniature. Of course, also there are some players who do really enjoy the process of doing something like painting their own miniatures, and they are going to lose out on that opportunity in this spectrum. But as I said, the benefits is that overall it is much more affordable and much more flexible, and most of these systems will allow you to do things like use digital dice or digital cards or things of that nature that can just make the whole game much easier to transition into and play out, both from an affordability standpoint yet again, but also because, if you're rolling 6 sided die, most of these digital systems will do the math for you. And then you don't need to worry about doing all those calculations either out loud or in your head, etc. The last form of tabletop is theater of the mind, an imaginary tabletop. Theater of the mind is the concept of conjuring up these images in your head, creating more of a thorough and in-depth, often visceral mind space experience of what it is that your characters are seeing, what it is that they're experiencing. A lot of this comes specifically with the GM's ability to describe what's going on, which is a very important skill. In many ways, the descriptions is what helps bring the game to life. Even if you are using a virtual or physical tabletop, most of those are going to still be looking at the game from a top-down perspective, not from a first-person viewpoint. The first-person viewpoint and the ability to really immerse yourself in your characters as the players comes from the narration of the GM in explaining what you're seeing in front of you, how your character is perceiving their environment. And that is all done through theater of the mind. As I said with Mutants and Masterminds, there's a number of games out there that really focus in on this theater of the mind type approach and don't even necessarily need or make use of a physical board to any real extent. In addition to that, you can incorporate several of these tools together. It's often harder to incorporate virtual and physical tabletops together, but as I said, the theater of the mind kind of always takes place and always has a place in either of these forms of playing the game. And of course, almost all tabletop role-playing games have some form of element that needs to be translated either physically or virtually, whether it's something like character sheets or dice or cards or any of the other elements that are essential to actually manipulating the circumstances of the game or to knowing, what items your character has in their inventory, what their abilities are, because asking your players to try and memorize all of that is also asking a little too much most of the time, especially for these much more complicated systems. At the end of the day, what this comes down to is conversation yet again with you and your players, what kind of system they feel comfortable with, what will be most helpful for them in their gaming experience in being immersed in the game, and also what people can afford and how people are going to be able to play. For example, a virtual tabletop also has the benefit of you don't need to physically be in the same space in order to play. There's many groups out there who meet regularly or semi-regularly to play TTRPGs, but maybe they're in completely different cities, and so they wouldn't really be able to come together to play a game. But if you can play virtually, then they can play more consistently. So take all of that in mind when you have that conversation with your players. A lot of this goes into some of the conversation that you would have during session 0. If you haven't seen those videos that I've made on session 0 already, then I suggest you look at them, as they will be very useful for providing a foundation of many of the other topics that are going to be discussed about the role-playing experience as a whole and tabletop RPGs as a whole. But I hope you all found this helpful, and I hope to see you all next time. Take care, my fellow scholars.